Georgian government are to create more new jobs, to build strong middle class, and ensure peace and stability. Hand in hand with security is the need for strong economy. And here we offer unique opportunity for investment, trade, innovation based on our geographical location and business-friendly environment. Georgia is a gateway to this region. Our goal is to integrate not only East and West, but North and South. Therefore, Georgia is taking concrete steps to build strong economic relations with all our partners in the region and beyond. In the past few years, Georgia has undergone a profound transformation in terms of building strong state institutions based on Western principles of democracy, rule of law, and free market economy. Georgia is the only country in the region that has FTA at the same time with the European Union and China. As a nation aligned with the West, our association agreement is with EU, which includes agreement on deep and comprehensive free trade area, is one of the most important milestones in our country's history. At the same time, in 2017, we signed free trade agreement with People's Republic of China. These initiatives transformed our country into an effective economic platform where big economies can trade and do business. Apart from FTAs with EU and China, Georgia enjoys free trade regime with Turkey, with CIS countries, with EFTA, as well as GSP with the United States, Canada, and Japan. Also, we are starting FTA negotiations with India, and we have almost finalized our joint feasibility study about FTA with Israel. The existing network of FTAs gives businesses operating in Georgia free access to a 2.3 billion consumer markets. In addition to its strong trade network, and Georgia also investing in development of infrastructure, starting from logistic, transport, and enhancing connectivity. Our plan is to transfer Georgia into a regional transport and logistic hub. Georgia's overall progress in creating an investment-friendly environment is effectively translated in foreign direct investments. In the last 5 years, total FDI inflow in the country amounted to more than $8 billion. Moreover, Georgia's progress is positively reflected in various international rankings and assessments. According to Doing Business by the World Bank, Georgia is 6th in the world in terms of ease of doing business. According to the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, Georgia ranks 16th among 180 countries. In addition, according to Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, Georgia holds the 41st position, way ahead of its regional peers. The stable macroeconomic environment and implementation of structural economic reforms are reflected in improved international credit ratings in recent years. I hope this helps you to put in context Georgia's economic vision and attractiveness for investment. That is why the realization of investment potential of the new Silk Road is vitally important for every participant countries, of course for Georgia also. From the very beginning, travelers on the Silk Road were entering and imagining the new world. I'm confident that this forum will encourage you to see in this region and this country in the new way. I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
Madlobt, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. Welcome to you all. My name is Joe Lynham. I'm with the BBC for many years, since 2001, and I present a show now on the BBC World Service called The Newsroom, which is a current affairs show featuring global news, which I enjoy. Before that, I was a business and economics correspondent with the BBC, and I covered the financial crisis, which started in 2008 or 2007, depending on when you think the clock starts. And if I ended up in your country was in deep financial trouble, unfortunately. I covered the Eurozone crisis, and I covered most recently the Brexit crisis in the UK. But I need to stress that I work for the BBC, but I am an Irishman. And I want to tell you all a story about a small, open republic and how it transformed itself, because I think there are lessons to be learned here. When I was born in the early 1970s, the Republic of Ireland was the poorest country in Western Europe. It was agriculture-based. All its young people were emigrating. Brain drain. And 60% of its trade went to one big, powerful neighbour. Then it joined the European Union, or the EEC, as it was then. It invested in infrastructure, it invested in brain power, in its universities, and it looked at its tax regime. In 2019, Ireland is the second richest country in the European Union. Only little Luxembourg is richer. Georgia can learn from that lesson. Georgia could be the Republic of Ireland of this area. The Silk Road Initiative could be the start of a major transformation in this country, one that makes this country wealthy and a home for its young people. Not just a start for its young people, but the beginning, middle, and end for its talent. We will discuss one very simple question today to investors in Georgia. Why? Why did you come here? Why did you pick this country? And what will make you stay? I'm going to introduce our panel shortly, but we have a poll, a Slido poll. Do we have something we put up there? SLI.do. That's the question we're going to ask. Which objectives could be achieved by investing in Georgia? Market diversification, cost effectiveness, access to resources. Get your mobile phones out, put it on silent, please, and pick your choice. You don't have to vote now, but in the course of the next session. That will be great. I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'm going to sit down over here for a bit. Hopefully my microphones continue to work. Can you still hear me? Good. Natia Tornava is the Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development in Georgia. She was appointed earlier this year. Before that, she was the Deputy Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development, which she held since last year. We're looking forward to hearing why people should continue to invest here, Minister. Valery Vavilov is the founder of the Bitfury Group. Valery? The CEO as well, the world's leading full-service blockchain company. How many of you knew what blockchain was 7 or 8 years ago? Valery's entrepreneurial experience and passion for blockchain technology led him to found the company in 2011, when blockchain technology was just beginning to capture the world's attention and imagination. I didn't know what it was until 2013. Alexander Bernard is the co-head of Cerberus and Senior Managing Director. Mr. Bernard leads Cerberus's private investment activities in frontier markets. Mr. Bernard joined Cerberus in 2018 when the firm acquired SGI Frontier Capital to strategically advance its investment activities in emerging and frontier markets. His previous role as Managing Director of SGI, he was instrumental in helping establish it as a pioneer in frontier market investing with a strong reputation as an early mover in some of Asia and Africa's most exciting and fastest growing markets. Valery, thank you for joining us. William Markstein, Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Tramo. Bill is a Senior Vice President and and Chief Financial Officer of Tramo, and is an international commodity merchandiser engaging in marketing, trading, distribution and transportation of a variety of commodity products, including a market leader in anhydrous ammonia, sulfur, sulfuric acid, nitric acid and petroleum coke. Morning, Bill. Fatih Gufen is the General Manager of Enka Power. Fatih is General Manager at the Power Plants Division of Enka, the largest independent power producer in Turkey and board member in Enka Renewables, developing the, I'm going to pronounce this very badly, Nanakavana HEP plant in Georgia. Please, how do you pronounce that? Okay, that's roughly what I said. Erkeli Berdaladze, who I had the pleasure of having a few drinks with last night and showing me Tbilisi, is this Chief Executive of JSC M Squared Real Estate. Erkeli, he previously served as the Deputy CEO of the JSC Bank of Georgia, which is listed in London, I understand, in charge of operations. Have I left anybody out? I haven't. Remember to go to your poll and give your views on your poll as soon as you can. So we will discuss the poll session first. I'd like to turn to the Minister first, if I may. Minister Tornava, could you outline the key reforms which positioned Georgia as an attractive FDI destination? And as you can see from the clock, we're going to be fairly strict on time, unfortunately, Minister.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to be sure that you spent a great time here in Tbilisi and that you had a very fruitful and interesting discussions yesterday, and probably the more fruitful and interesting discussions planned for today. To address your question, let me say a few words about core vision and undertakings of Georgian government. As you may know, Georgia is not that rich with mineral resources. We represent pretty small market, and of course, in order to be more attractive, our business model, our business climate, vision and the policy is fully based on the being open and advantage for foreign direct investments, on being liberal and attractive. And also for us, it is a core to maintain stability and predictability in terms of policy, macroeconomic stability, because it is not surprising that nowadays maintaining macroeconomic stability and being advantageous and attractive for foreign direct investments became an equivalence. And in this respect, I would like to say that Georgia is doing quite well. We have a good performance in terms of maintaining macroeconomic stability. We have one of the highest growth rates, economic growth rate within the whole region, and the Georgian economy proved resilient towards significant economic and financial regional shocks. According to the latest estimates by International Monetary Fund, we keep growing for 5% in average for the next 5 years, which is quite impressive and stable indicator and good indicator, and message towards global community of investors that Georgia is a worthy place to invest in. But it is even more important that our economic growth is not the only focus of our policy, because as Prime Minister mentioned in his opening remarks, for us not only pace of growth matters, but also the quality of growth. It means that growth should be inclusive, should generate additional employment, and it is very important for us that our economic growth has been supported by structural reforms, and I would like also to mention in particular DCFTA reforms agenda, because our economic growth is mainly driven by export and by investments, and gradual implementation of DCFTA reforms and approximation of our legislation towards European standards. These are the main basis for enhancing of competitiveness of our small and medium-sized businesses, for diversification of our markets, and full utilization of all opportunities that deep and comprehensive free trade area, as well as other numerous free trade agreements, grant and give to us. So before naming, let's say, listing particular important areas of reforms, I would like to say that these achievements are well reflected in international rankings. Just recently, during 2019, two leading credit rating agencies such as Fitch and Standard & Poor's has upgraded sovereign credit rating of Georgia to BB with a stable outlook. Again, stability is very important, and I think it's a very positive message towards investors, towards foreign investors, that Georgia will keep stable and top reformer as well as top performer in terms of business climate. Just to be more particular, I would like to underline few important areas of reforms. First of all, this is an education reform, which is a cornerstone for our long-term economic development. We have an ambition to move towards knowledge-driven and innovation-driven economy. So that's why Georgian government is very much committed to increase public spendings in area of education and science in particular. By 2022, our public spendings in the field of education will reach 6% of GDP, which is quite an ambitious goal, but at the same time absolutely achievable, considering our dedication to that issue. In this respect, I also would like to mention, I'm running out of time, but I will be brief. I also would like to mention upcoming reforms and ongoing reforms in terms of addressing challenges on the labor market, because we have some structural problems at the labor market, while Georgia offers quite knowledgeable and competitively priced labor force. We still need to work more on the professional education in the field of vocational education to eliminate some bottlenecks for particular fields, rapidly growing fields of economy. Structural reforms should be mentioned, such as pension reform, capital market development, full-fledged enforcement of PPP law. All these directions shall allow us to make more private business engaged in implementation of large-size infrastructural projects through PPP, risk-sharing mechanisms, to increase savings, to increase productivity, which is a key for further, let's say, enhancement of our economic growth. Last but not least, I should mention some sectoral reforms like energy reform, but I do hope that my colleagues here on the panel will touch upon that issue. Also, I would like to underline the importance of actions oriented at institutional strengths. Of course, we are, again, among top performers according to World Bank in terms of easy doing business. However, this achievement should be reaffirmed all the time, and that's why we're continuing to implement one-stop shop principles, single window principles in all areas whenever public services meet private business. So in terms of privatization, in terms of permit and licensing process, whenever we can implement digital approach, electronic platforms, single window principle, we're doing our best. And I also finally would like to say that together with these reforms, government of Georgia attach a lot of attention to the development of SME sector, enhancement of competitiveness, especially we would like to support SMEs to go globally, to be more innovative, more competitive, to build more quality insurance system in order to help them to be compliant with European standards of quality. So there is many other things to be mentioned, but I think that as we're building the open economy market where the private sector is dominating, I would like also to let's say, encourage our private participants to dominate, let's say, over public sector here on that panel. Thank you very much.
Minister Ternava, thank you very much. Now I'm going to go to the individual panelists. Thank you. Let's start with Valeri. Valeri, our Bitcoin friend, or distributed ledger friend. Why did you invest in Georgia?
Yeah, we're in Georgia for 5 years already. We started in 2014. And before starting business in Georgia, we had several choices where to go. But we choose Georgia for a few reasons. Number one reason is efficiency, yeah? And the really easy of doing business, because for us, speed is everything. Yeah, the efficiency is very important for our company because we're in a new space, in a new industry, in a very innovative industry. And for example, to build our data centers back in 2014, from day one, when we decided to build data center, till the last day when we launched it in production, it took just a few months, with all the approvals, with everything. So it was quite impressive. Comparison to other countries where it took 2 to 3 times longer. Second, also very important point is the taxation. Yeah, Georgia has very simple tax regime and quite low taxation. Georgia has only 4 taxes, and it's very simple and straightforward, which is also very important for business. Number 3 reason why we choose Georgia is the renewable energy, because our data center consume energy, and for us it's very important to be fully green, and most of the energy in Georgia is the hydro. And the last, but not least, also the support of innovation. Blockchain back then, a few years ago, nobody knew about blockchain, and Georgia government was very supportive of launching first in the world blockchain service, one of the first in the world blockchain service in government services. Together with together with Georgian government, we implemented blockchain for land title registration. And it was also done quite efficient from day one when we started conversation till the last day when we launched it. It took just several months.
Wow, someone who came in under time. I'm pretty impressed. Just to let you guys know, we have a big clock here in front of us. You don't see it, and it puts serious pressure on the speakers. And it goes red when you go over your 5 minutes, which the minister did. Alexander Bernard from Cerberus, why did you come here?
Thanks. I should start by clarifying that although I wish I was the co-head of Cerberus, and maybe one day I will be, I'm the co-head of Cerberus Frontier, which is the frontier markets arm. I don't want people back home to think I staged a coup while I was in Georgia.
I better cancel that tweet then.
So Cerberus, just a few words about Cerberus, because I think it's relevant to contextualize why it is that we're here in Georgia. Cerberus is a large American private equity firm. We own some businesses in the U.S. that are pretty familiar to most people in America. They're kind of household names. We own the largest grocery store chain, for example, the largest hospital chain. In Europe, we're currently the biggest shareholder of Commerzbank, one of the largest shareholders of Deutsche Bank. We manage about $45 billion across a variety of sectors and geographies. So my role specifically as the co-head of the Frontier Markets Group within Cerberus is to go out into the less discovered, less familiar parts of the world and to identify what I would call the contrarian bets, basically to find the countries that for whatever reason are still underappreciated, that for whatever reason are still poorly understood and therefore underinvested, meaning there's not enough foreign investors in these markets because of these sort of perception issues, to find these countries and then to make bets on these countries. And if I'm doing my job correctly, then I'm picking markets that are actually much, much better than the public perception. In Georgia, I think I have found the ultimate perception gap opportunity, Because if you speak to people in the US in particular, to a lesser extent in Europe, because I think in Europe there is a higher degree of familiarity with Georgia, but especially in the US, if you talk to people, what they think of is a small country in a tough part of the world with difficult neighbors that had a conflict with Russia, you know, some 10-ish years ago that's still, for whatever reason, very fresh on people's minds in America. But you come here, and all of you are here, so you're now seeing it with your own eyes. This country could not be further removed from that perception. You stay in the hotels here, and you know you feel like you are in New York or London, just in terms of the level of design and
the
innovation.
weather is better, Alexander.
The weather is certainly better,
Yeah.
but that's a low bar, especially for talking about London. You talk to the policymakers here, and you realize that there is a level of sophistication that is not really frontier. I mean, this is almost a developed market level of sophistication among the policymakers. They speak perfect English. They've been educated at top universities around the world. They can speak proficiently on any topic, but especially topics that relate to business and investment. It's a very savvy set of policymakers. And the regional dynamic, although of course challenging, is also a huge opportunity because the broader Caucasus region is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and Georgia, I think, is indeed well on its way to becoming the Ireland of the region or the Switzerland of the region. It's far and away the most hospitable business climate in the region. So the fact that the neighbors are so difficult, on the one hand, is a challenge, but on the other hand is also an opportunity because it means that if you base yourself in Georgia, you're at a huge advantage and you can reach these countries in the region very easily, but in the context of a good regulatory environment with a good tax regime and a very, frankly, comfortable quality of life. So as a regional headquarters for a team, this is a very attractive place to locate. The opportunities, in our view, are vast. We've started initially with a focus on the energy sector, and we've been making some investments in hydropower, but we're now broadening the aperture. We see huge opportunity in the logistics and transportation space. We see opportunities in hospitality. You all, of course, know the statistics in terms of what's happening here with tourism. It's astronomical. So many opportunities both in Georgia and then from Georgia with the regional focus. So for us, a very, very exciting place to be.
Alexander, speaking almost to the second, I appreciate that. Let's go to Bill Markstein, the CFO from Tramo. Bill, you're the guy who loves the smell of sulfur in the morning.
Thanks, Joe. And Minister, it's great to be here in Tbilisi again. Yeah, Tramo Inc. is a commodity merchandiser, international firm. It's based in New York City, but it has 20 offices around the world. We have big trading hubs in Switzerland, Dubai, Singapore. We're in Brazil, Russia, France, and other places. And we've recently come and invested in Georgia with for a strategic investment with a partner, WonderNet, a sponsor of this great forum today. So our investment is in the Batumi port. We have a vision of, for the last several years, about 7 years ago, we started thinking about an alternative route for our suppliers and customers to receive fertilizer products and other commodities like sulfur, which is used in fertilizer production. The logistics corridor project that we're involved with is looking at moving lots of Central Asian commodities, fertilizer, sulfur, across the Caspian and into Baku, and then railing it all the way over to Batumi through Georgia. It's a terrific project that we're very excited about. It's very complicated trading routes before. Without this corridor, because you have political situations not only in Iran and other countries which aren't as stable as we believe this route will be. Batumi port, we signed a joint venture agreement in January with WonderNet, and it's been moving very quickly. Construction already started. We closed the financing with Bank of Georgia several months ago, and the construction, the earthworks, foundations already underway. Warehouses are going to be coming next, as well as ship loaders and lots of a conveyor system that's going to be built, state of the art, and it's a greenfield project. Some of the investment considerations when we were looking at this project that made this so attractive to Tramo and WonderNet is the strategic location. We've heard about that throughout the 2 days here. You know, the travel time from China all the way through Europe, through Georgia is you know, a third less time in terms of lots of commodities that will move from the Far East. Central Asia production is a huge factor. There's more than 5 million tons of fertilizers and other commodity products like sulfur that are going to be available for export. In fact, there's two or three new plant projects in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So that 5 million tons is going to be increasing to well over 7 million tons, and they're looking for a home in the world to get to the global markets. And this path through the Caspian, across through Georgia, will allow that product to find a home. There's incredible infrastructure here with the Georgian rail system that we know is going to be very reliable for our project to create the logistical hubs that we want to create in Baku and Batumi. I mentioned the stable and efficient trade route that is so important to know that you can rely on it when our suppliers have to keep moving products constantly as they produce them, and that's a big investment factor for us. And before we came into Georgia, it was very important to us to find a very reliable local partner, because all these projects are quite complicated, and you need someone that understands the region very well, and we found that. What else do I?
You can wind up early.
Yeah.
If you want,
And the other thing is just the business climate generally. You know, and I'm the chairman of our investment committee, and you know, a question right off the bat from the board is, so how is Georgia doing these days on corruption and stability? And it was just great to be able to say the improvements that it's made in terms of how high up it's gone in the rankings of the ease of doing business, as well as becoming corruption-free, and that was quite important to us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Now let's go to Fatih Gufen from the Turkish company Enka. Why are you investing in Georgia?
Thank you, Joe. First, during construction of South Caucasian pipeline expansion project, and then during later development of Namakwani project, we witnessed Georgia have made big strides in integrating globally and setting out favorable environment for doing business. As the other speakers repeated today, ranks at the top of several indexes indicating ease of doing business. The first of this forum coincides with the beginning of the Namakwani project. So since then, we experienced changing governments, changing ministries and reforms, amendments in law in compliance with the EU regulation, but strong dedication towards an open market and better investment environment haven't changed. So that was pretty remarkable for us. Also, the transparency, ethics, and compliance in government sector were key factors in attracting investment, and we witnessed again that was treated as one at the top priority in Georgia. With this Belt and Road initiative, this initiative presents new perspectives and additional potential to Georgia as well. So we trust Georgia will keep improving both business, trade, and attract more direct investment for to be stable and prosper country in the future. So these were the key factors for making a decision to invest in Georgia.
Fatih, thank you very much. Finally, Irakli Burdeladze is the chief executive of M2 Real Estate. You're a Georgian. Why did you invest in your own country?
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to address such a distinguished audience, and special thanks to the government of Georgia for organizing this very, very interesting event. I'll talk about what's it like to invest in Georgia from the perspective of our company. 10 years ago, when M2 Real Estate, which is the biggest real estate developer in this country, started investing in Georgia, we looked at things like pace of reforms, economic growth, tax rates, and law and order in the country. And we started investing. Today, when you look at Georgia, you see that Georgia is one of the fastest reforming countries in the world. Many have already mentioned that Georgia is ranked number 6 in the world by the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, and this tells a lot about the success that the Georgian government made in terms of reforming the country. Georgia has one of the highest growth rates of economy, growing on average at 5% annually over the past 10 years. Georgia outperformed its peer countries in CIS and Central and Eastern Europe by more than 2 times. At the same time, Georgia offers very low tax rates, and taxes are flat. And the most recent shift to the so-called Estonian model, in which reinvested profits are not taxed, gives additional incentives to the investors to expand their business activity in this country. And obviously, defeating corruption was the biggest achievement of the government of Georgia, and this continues to be a very significant, low corruption continues to be a significant incentive for the investors to invest in this country. And as already have been mentioned here many times, Georgia ranks number 1 among the least corrupt countries in Central and Eastern Europe by Corruption Perception Index. So we are happy to be investors in this country, but all of these factors, of course, matter. But as representing real estate sector, I should mention one more factor, which is very important for us in terms of decision making to invest in this country, and this is location, location, and location. Basically, if you take a global map and look at the global map, and you will see that Georgia has a prime location on the global map. Situated in the South Caucasus, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, it is a natural hub, a connecting point between East and West, North and South, and as such, Georgia opens up doors for opportunities to invest in multiple sectors, be it transport and communication, financial intermediation, real estate, and others. But I have to mention also one thing that distinguishes Georgia, and this is its beautiful nature, extremely pleasant climate, and amazing culinary and winemaking history,
I can confirm that.
Which puts Georgia on a global tourist map as one of the fastest growing destinations. And I'll give you one number. Georgia's population is 3.7 million people, and last year we hosted 5 million tourists in Georgia who spent $3.3 billion, which represents 20% of Georgia's GDP. So this number tells how important tourism is for this country, and our company, being in real estate business, is moving aggressively into hospitality sector. We opened our first hotel last year with 152 rooms under Ramadan core brand, and we have 11 other projects in our pipeline, hotel projects to be opened within the next 2 to 3 years. So 3 years down the road, we will have a portfolio of around 12 hotels with more than 1,200 rooms. Basically, investing in this country is associated with high returns. And I would like to finish my speech with another number, which I'm going to give you today. 10 years ago, when M2 Real Estate started investing in real estate in Georgia, the company was worth $20 million, measured in terms of net asset value. Today, taking into consideration all the dividends that we pay to our parent company, net asset value of the company stands close to $100 million. So we grew 5 times in 10 years. And this spectacular growth is attributable to many factors, but one of the most critical factors is the investor and business-friendly environment, which is supported by the government of Georgia. Thank you.
Wow, you're buying dinner tonight. Irakli, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to the Minister, Minister Turnava, with a question. What are the economic sectors that you're prioritizing now when you want foreign direct investment?
Well, Georgia represents, as it was already mentioned, the fastest growing economy in the region, which provides a lot of room for different numerous business sectors to be developed. But if speaking about the fastest and probably the most attractive top winner businesses, I think that the composition of our panel also speaks for itself. Here we see representatives of energy, logistics, transportation, real estate and development businesses. All those sectors and fields are still the most attractive industries. And I think that it would be good to start from the transportation and logistics, as we gathered here for Silk Road Forum. Of course, it's well-known fact that our favorable geopolitical location creates a lot of opportunities for development of transport and logistics services. And here I would like to underline great synergy between public investments and the private investments. Huge public investments has been made to improve our transport infrastructure, to build more large-scale infrastructural projects, while private sector has been contributed more on the side of development of related value chain and related supply chain in terms of logistics services, in terms of development of urban mobility, eco-friendly modes of transport, also construction industry, production of construction and building materials that are related to the infrastructural project and supply to huge infrastructural project as well. Construction industry also is booming here, and it's still one of the most attractive. Another important field where investors are still interested in, despite all reforms and changes, and probably due to the reforms and changes, this is energy. Georgia is a water-rich country, and we can say that about 80% of our electricity production comes from green energy, hydropower plants. However, the rapidly growing economy also leads to the growing consumption of electricity, which means at the same time challenge, because we need to build more power plants. However, it also represents new opportunity for the businesses. And so in this respect, we are very glad to observe growing trend of investments in small and medium-sized renewables. And apart from hydropower plants, we are supporting a lot of the diversification of our energy mix and encouraging businesses to invest in other renewables like wind, like solar park. Also, I would like to mention, of course, tourism and hospitality sector. So I don't want to, let's say, repeat the figures, and also Irakli Bordiladze mentioned our top, let's say, advantage. This is hospitality and winemaking history. However, I would like to say that Georgia already hosts 3 times greater number of visitors than our local population, and of course it creates new opportunities for the businesses. All well-known hospitality brands are presented here, but still there is a good room and an attractive room for investments in 3-star hotels, in 4-star hotels infrastructure, especially in rural areas, to develop ecotourism, to develop agro-touristic destinations, where Georgian government also provides financial and marketing support and creates a room for additional private investments. Finally, last but not least, I would like to underline importance of manufacturing, because Georgia itself is a very small market, but if seen from the perspective of being investment hub, and if considering numerous free trade agreements that grant the custom-free access to 2.3 billion consumers from here, from the Georgian market, we already has become a very attractive place for moving here some parts of production chain, of supply chain, in terms of machinery, manufacturing of equipment, and I don't want to list particular new joint ventures, just not to miss anyone, but it is a real opportunity. So that's very briefly, just a few major industries.
Minister, thank you. I think you've mostly answered my follow-up question, was what are you going to do in terms of future policy to attract FDI, but I think you've already answered that one in your answer there. So I'm going to go back to the panel now and ask the individual panelists what more the Georgian government could do to facilitate investment. Maybe we could start again with Valeri. What would you expect to get from the Georgian government to continue to invest here?
We're a technology company, and we're in the very innovative space. And what we see, but the world is moving very fast from resource-driven economies to data-driven economies. And I think the Georgian government is already doing and should continue to embrace the innovation. Yeah, should continue to motivate companies such as ours to innovate. Yeah, and for us, what is important from Georgian government to continue supporting the innovation, to continue supporting the new industries, to issue supporting laws for crypto industry, for blockchain industry, for artificial intelligence, and for robotics. And yeah, this is, I think, for us is one of the key factors.
Did you guys get any, did your company get any incentives, Valeri, to invest here? And what kind of incentives would attract you?
So incentive, I already mentioned about the main incentives what we got in Georgia, yeah, and but the main incentive, of course, the speed, yeah, the efficiency and the speed of moving forward.
Right.
And that's why I mentioned what Georgian government should continue to support the innovative technologies and support it with appropriate laws and appropriate implementation in the country. And by doing this, I think Georgia can be a country which will lead by example the rest of the world. And I know Georgia signed the association with the European Union and can learn a lot from European Union. But I think European Union and other countries also can learn a lot from Georgia. Yeah? And the more Georgia will implement new technology, new innovation in different industries, the more it can lead by example and show to the world how to be more efficient.
Okay, Alexander, you're in the energy sector. What kind of incentives would you like from the Georgian government to continue the investment here?
Well, let me just start by saying that in Georgia, the ease of doing business really is the key incentive, in my view, more so than any particular program or any particular benefit that's offered in a given sector or to a given company. And for people that are used to doing business in the US and Europe, ease of doing business is kind of taken for granted. But when your day job consists of investing in frontier markets, then you really start to see the difference between what it means when a country has ease of doing business and when it doesn't. I mean, just to kind of give a few examples, I was looking at Mozambique a couple of years ago. To even travel to Mozambique on a business visa was almost a Herculean accomplishment in and of itself, because one had to go through many, many steps to get various invitation letters that then had to get certified by various embassies and then pay certain fees. And then when you arrived in the country, they actually, I guess, get so few business visitors that they didn't recognize the business visa. And so that triggered a separate set of conversations. You know, here in Georgia, it's stamp your passport, welcome to Georgia. In Sri Lanka, If you want to be able to pull your dollars out of the country, you have to set up a special type of company with special types of accounts and get special types of approvals every time you want to repatriate money, either in dividends or in other forms. Again, here in Georgia, the money comes in, the money comes out. That's just, it is what it is, right? In the Philippines, we're in the process right now of setting up a company, and we were just told it could take 1 to 2 months to incorporate the entity. Here, we incorporate entities within 24 hours. So ease of doing business is a real thing. And again, when you're comparing like for like, if you're not comparing Georgia to Canada, but if you're comparing Georgia to the other countries that people are looking at when they're considering an investment in more of a sort of frontier emerging market, then you can really tell what a difference it makes. The only advice that I can give, and of course Minister Trnava has heard me say this before, and we've talked about this, is that Georgia, on the one hand, is just doing a fantastic job by always thinking and innovating and trying to come up with new ways to improve the regulatory environment, and Georgia is to be commended for that. But sometimes those changes can create policy uncertainty, because if there's too much change, and in the hydropower sector, we've seen some of this, where the Georgian government has been continuously trying to improve the investment climate, but in doing so has been changing the investment regime. That can make it sometimes difficult to plan, and so the key advice that I would give is that as the reforms take place, to make sure that those reforms are not coming at the expense of certainty and stability for investors.
Thank you, Alexander. Bill.
As Minister Trnava said, for these projects, it really does take a public-private partnership to be successful. And when Tramo first came to Georgia, we were really well received by the government. They even traveled with us to Batumi to look at the project. In addition, it wasn't just having a big signing ceremony, a big reception. They continue to show support throughout the many months we've been working on this project. They've traveled even to Azerbaijan with us, and they've opened up lots of great diplomatic channels to Turkmenistan as well as Azerbaijan and the U.S. And that goes a long way for knowing that we have the support of the government here. The other things that are really important incentives or conditions of stability here for us are all the protection in recent years on protection of investor and creditor rights. When we were making a decision, that played an important part. An independent judiciary is another, has shown great progress here, and I think it will continue to do so, which will make the business climate even more favorable, and investors can rely on certainty that their investments will be well protected here.
Are you able to compare, Bill, with other countries in the sense that you talked about the independence of the judiciary and being able to enforce contracts? I presume you can compare with other countries that are less good.
Oh, yeah, certainly. We've had issues over the years in certain countries that it takes a long time to enforce your rights. If you have a blatant breach of contract in other parts of the world, the Indian judiciary has been very slow. And other parts of the world, but there's been progress all through the world. But I think Georgia's pace is to be really commended on how fast they're moving in this direction.
Bill, thank you very much. Fatih, what are your thoughts on this issue? Further policy enhancements.
I agree that Georgia doesn't need to introduce many incentives, but to keep to stay at top of the ease of doing business rankings. So it is really the most important factor for direct investment, to attract direct investment. And for us, the second, energy independence, we believe, is a key factor for stability again, to get better living conditions for prosperity, not only in the region, but also not in the country, but also in the region as well. So with its huge hydro capacity, it's the highest per capita in the world. I think Georgia has a great opportunity to achieve energy independence. And this will be, this of course needs an investment on transmission lines, grid, big hydro projects, as well as renewable energy resources. Also, it's due to its strategic location, Georgia is a unique corridor for transit flow from Europe to Central Asia. It needs large infrastructure projects. So these projects, Georgia may end up, or the countries with such kind of projects may end up with rising public debt. So in order to avoid that, we need foreign direct investment. And I believe Georgia will achieve this, but not only attracting the investment, but also implementation, as well as financing, they bear certain risks. So keeping a close eye on the implementation of such projects will be important, I think, as much as incentives. I believe these will be more important than name of the incentives or the plan on the incentives itself.
Okay, Fatih, thank you. And Irakli, what more would you like to get from the Georgian government to make it easier for you to do your business?
Well, as I said, Georgia has a high growth environment, and success story of Georgia is based on a number of things: low tax rates, high economic growth rate, fast reforms, low corruption. And this high growth environment actually helps businesses to grow as well. But for businesses to keep up with this growth, we need people, we need hands, we need brains, we need human capital. And therefore, investment in education becomes a top priority. And I'd like to give you an example of a very good cooperation between private sector and public sector. Last year, together with the Ministry of Education, our company has launched a construction college in West Georgia. And that college prepares 600 skilled workers every year, and those workers are offered jobs in our company, in our projects. And those trainings are free of charge. This year, we're again working with the government to launch another college, this time focused on hospitality sector, to prepare staff for hotels and restaurants. And these types of investments in education, this kind of vocational training centers become critical to sustain the growth environment in Georgia.
Minister, can I go back to you with an investment in education? Is that something that your government is looking at, making sure that the people are trained here in Georgia to provide the workforce of the future?
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned earlier, the education reform represents one of the key drivers of our economic development as we are moving towards knowledge-driven economy. And what we can observe right now, that despite the fact that Georgia offers one of the, let's say, most well-priced and competitively priced and knowledgeable labor force to the industries, some of them are not relevant to the modern, to the, let's say, ongoing needs of particular industries. For example, we observe such kind of a gap in qualified working force in textile industry, in construction industry, in engineering, and this is a real challenge when we're talking about the industries that has the potential to grow very fastly. So that's why our government, Ministry of Education, us, we are mostly concentrated and pay a lot of attention to development of vocational education, to development of particular well-targeted trainings that are aligned with the needs of our industry. And partnership with the private business in this respect is very important, because it allows us to, let's say, find a lot of synergy between public resources and the private resources, because, you know, government can support, but government never know better than business and never have a superior knowledge of what is needed, because business is always more, let's say, flexible and let's say the best indicator how to develop our educational sector.
Okay, and I'm going to go back to Alexander, if I may. A quick question for you. When you're sitting in your office, wherever your office is, in New York or wherever, do you care about these perception indices? So that when we hear that Georgia is the 6th best country to do with ease of doing business, and then we hear that it's doing really well on the corruption index, does that matter for you? In other words, before you even get on a plane, do you judge a country on these perception indexes?
I think the perception indexes are certainly relevant when you're doing your initial desktop research on which new markets you might want to consider, which new markets you might want to visit. You know, those sorts of indicators are very important. Of course, once you're in the market, the indicators are less important than the actual on-the-ground reality, and the happy fact for Georgia is that the on-the-ground reality does in fact reflect the statistics on these indexes. I mean, as I was explaining earlier, just on ease of doing business, there's simply no comparison between Georgia and a whole host of other countries that we spend our time in. So the high ranking on the ease of doing business list is very much justified by the reality. What I would say about the indexes, though, is that even when you're Cerberus, and we're fortunate to have obviously a good reputation in the U.S. and we have a lot of resources at our disposal. At the end of the day, everybody answers to somebody, and in our case, I'm either answering to an investment committee or I'm answering to a board, or we as an institution are answering to investors, pension funds or endowments or sovereign wealth funds that trust us with their capital. And for those conversations, because obviously we can't expect all of them to come and visit Georgia and see things with their own eyes, for those conversations, the indexes are very, very important. And Georgia's performance on these rankings is extremely important, and we point to where Georgia is in these rankings often, either in our internal investment committee deliberations when we're seeking approval for a new investment, or with our compliance team if we're talking about investing in a sector that maybe has more government involvement, whether it's energy, where you're dealing with regulators, or whether it's other areas. Obviously, the compliance team will have a lot of questions, and there's going to be enhanced scrutiny. So if you can point to these indexes, that helps. And certainly with the investors, so that they understand that we're not completely crazy when we say we're investing in this or that thing in Georgia, to be able to point to Georgia's performance on these indicators is very helpful. So, Georgia should keep doing what it can to stay where it is on these rankings.
Fatih, I'm going to ask you the same question. You're sitting in Istanbul. You can invest anywhere in the world. Do you care about these perception indexes?
It is important to plan everything in advance, to make a desktop study, but we have tried to make investments in Nigeria, Tanzania, Egypt, Bangladesh, Indonesia, so obviously it is not the first priority. But when you start doing or start traveling, you see actually how it works, and it really matches, and it really helps to understand better in advance. Of course, it gives an impression at the beginning, but what it matters is it really a short-term success? Was it the long-term commitment in the country? So when you see that, when you actually go to country, when you start talking people, when you actually gather information or do some business, so it gives of course an advantage to understand better, at least the relief before making a decision. And when you actually experience what's going on in the country, it really has a real impact on making a decision on investment.
Thank you. Valery, the same question. Do you care about these indices?
Yeah, those indexes are very helpful because you know what to expect from the country. Yeah, it's very helpful, but when you start working, first thing is the theory, yeah, and the second thing is the real practice. And what we see in Georgia, what all those indexes are really working, yeah, and the country is very efficient.
Okay, Will, same question.
Oh, yeah, I agree with all the panelists. It's important when you're putting together a board proposal. It's great to cite these great statistics, but and you're doing your due diligence, and then when you actually get here and start working, and that's where you expect to see a follow through of all that. And I think that's it's important that we're all talking about corruption, and I think. All countries should continue to talk about it because to have a fair playing field is better for everybody.
Okay. Irakli, you're here in Tbilisi. You're a Georgian. Does it matter to you about these index when you're investing in this country?
It's a very good question, Joe. Thank you. Basically, when you look at those indexes, it's important to make a first impression. Georgia already has very good rankings in those indexes, and it's important that those indexes actually help people, help investors to make the first steps. But what's more important is that when they come to Georgia and they see the actual risks associated with investing in this country, they see that actual risks are far less than the perceived risks. And this actually, the very moment that you land in Georgia and have your first encounter with businesses, with people, with government, you realize that the perceived risk, which is already quite low based on those indexes, is actually far less than the actual risk is far less than the perceived risk in this country. And this is the most important factor that facilitates investments in this country.
Great. Now, just to remind all of you to have a look at the poll, the Slido poll. I think they put it up earlier on. So give your views on the question that we posed for the poll, which was, which objective could be achieved by investing in Georgia?
I'm sorry, may I elaborate a little bit on the indices issue, very briefly?
Absolutely. I just want to encourage people to vote in the poll, and then we'll come back to the Minister.
Before people is voting.
Oh, before people voting. Okay, she wants to... oh, we have the result already, my goodness. Right, Minister, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like just to add whatever my colleagues already mentioned regarding the importance of the indices. You know why? Because people here in Georgia is frequently asking us the same questions. Why do we care so much about the indices? And I would like to say that it has very, very practical implication to our reforms and development of our economy, because it is very much in line with our vision to attract in the nearest future more institutional type investors, like, for example, Alexander's fund is institutional type investors, equity funds, pension funds that would invest in our economy to have more portfolio type investments. And this is a real, let's say, future and a way how to increase FDIs and how to increase investments in our economy, how to provide long-term economic growth. And this international indices presents a kind of internationally recognized language, how to convince those type of institutional investors to go to Georgia, which still doesn't have sufficient awareness. And that's why it matters for everyone. That's I wanted just to add briefly on that.
Very useful. We're going to discuss the poll results shortly. I'm just going to give a quick synopsis of our session this morning. We spoke about the importance of openness, the importance of stability. Governments may change, policies may be tweaked, but stability is very important, so that investors know that in 5 years or in 10 years' time that they won't have a completely different environment to work in. We spoke about efficiency being important and how Georgia, in the world of big investment, was underappreciated, and how bets are placed on countries. And one contributor said that his bet has paid off quite well. We spoke about change being good, but not too much change. So constantly changing the policy is not going to help. We spoke about location being important and public-private partnerships. So individual companies working with the government, having access to the government being very important. We spoke about the challenge in the energy sector. more power plants being needed, more investment in energy so that you can work to the future, especially green energy, renewable energy. That were some of the key issues that we discussed this morning. In terms of the poll, we asked you which objectives could be achieved by investing in Georgia. 45% of you said market diversification, 45% said cost effectiveness, and only 10% said access to resources. Let me start with Valeri. Are you a bit surprised that access to resources was regarded so lowly?
I'm not really surprised that access to resources is regarded so lowly. I think, in my perspective, cost efficiencies is very important.
Did you vote for that?
I would vote for cost efficiency, yeah.
Yeah. But I took your mobile phone off you. Fatih, which one would you have voted for?
Market diversification.
Right. Why?
For us, it's in the region, not only in Turkey, but also another country to invest. And we believe in the future, Georgia will develop even further with a regional hub for energy as well.
Bill, which one would you have voted for? Which objectives could be achieved by investing in Georgia?
I think both, I mean, the tie is probably how I would have also voted. Both are very important, you know, creating this alternative logistics corridor for us to diversify. And it's also a very cost-effective way to move a lot of commodity to the west. Yes.
Alexander.
Yeah, well, as a portfolio investor, certainly market diversification is key, and cost effectiveness is part of what makes the market interesting. Within cost effectiveness, I would also just say part of that has to do not just with the actual costs in the market, but also with some of the arrangements that Georgia has put in place, meaning free trade arrangements with the EU and with other countries that make it a cost-effective hub for transshipments and for other activities that are more sort of export oriented. And I think, you know, Georgia should be happy that access to resources is such a low factor here, because, you know, resources are resources. That doesn't really say anything about whether the government has done a good job of creating a good environment for investment. But cost effectiveness and market diversification are actually better indicators of the country's actual performance and the government's actual performance.
Irakli, I'm a bit surprised that access to resources, especially human resources, figured so lowly. What would you have voted for?
If I had to pick one, I would pick market diversification. And in terms of access to resources, I think human resources is kind of reflected in cost effectiveness from that perspective. Georgia is not a resources-driven economy, as all of you know. In terms of market diversification, why I would pick market diversification? Georgia is a small country, but it provides high returns to the investors, and with its free trade agreements with big economies, basically, it's a very good platform for diversifying your operations if you are a foreign investor.
Okay, before I give the final word to the Minister, if we could get the panelists for a session 2 to be on standby, because we're going to bring them up straight away without a break. So, Minister, if you want to give your final thoughts and sum up the session, or your final thoughts on the poll?
I think that I can comment the let's say, results of the poll. I would like to share opinion of the audience that both market diversification and cost effectiveness are equally important when it comes to decision to invest in Georgian economy, because first of all, market diversification, as Alexander mentioned, matters for global companies who would like to mitigate their market risks by diversification, and Georgia really represents a safe and attractive place to invest in. And cost effectiveness, it is something that we are as a government are working on, and it is very much related to our high rankings in terms of easiness doing business, and it is something that we are implementing through and supporting through numerous reforms. We are trying our best to increase effectiveness of public services, and that's why I'm not surprised that the results are like we saw. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for excellent contribution.
Thank you. Let's thank our contributors, to Natia Tornava, to Valery Vavilov, to Alexander Bernard, to William Markstein, Fatih Gufen, and Irakli Burdeladze. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, if you want to kind of join the audience now, we're going to swap panels and bring up our second panel. Thank you very much to all of you. Let's bring up our second panel, please. Please bring up David, William, Abdul Rahman, Alexander, Robin, and Arkil. We're going to hopefully change the names as well. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Okay. It's still the morning time, so I'm going to say good morning again. And thank you for staying with us. Thank you for staying with us for the second session, which is Silk Road, the new landscape for cross-border. We're going to have a very interesting discussion, and then you'll be able to get to your lunch. I am going to introduce my panel, but before that, there is another poll question which I would like you to have a think about. I don't know if we have the poll question. Here we have. What are the advantages of investing in Georgia? The answers which you will have to think about are competitive labor cost, low taxes, network of free trade agreements, being a regional business hub. Have a think about those things. We're going to have our discussion, and it will make you wiser for your voting. We'll discuss the poll afterwards. I'm going to go to our panel and introduce, first of all, David. Hopefully I will get this pronunciation right. David Zaganalidze is the Chief Executive of the JSC Partnership Fund. He graduated from Tbilisi State Medical University. He worked at Moscow Oncological Medical Center and St. Petersburg Military Academy, as well as the Cancer Research Center here in Georgia's Ministry of Health. And he's also a graduate of Athens, London, and Brighton Business Schools, as well as the author of 2 books and 14 scientific papers. Good morning, David. William Thompson is the head of the Eurasia Division of the OECD Global Relations Secretariat, having previously spent 7 years as a senior economist in the organization's economics department and 6 years in its public governance and territorial development directorates. Perhaps we could close the door behind us there because there's a little bit of noise coming in. Abdul Rahman Essa Al Manai is the chief executive of the Milaha Group in Qatar. Abdul Rahman has been the president and CEO since September 2015, and he leads all the business areas of Milaha. Abdul Rahman, you're welcome. Alexander Meyer is the chief executive of AE Solar Alternative Energy in Germany. He dedicated his activities to renewables, driven by the concerns of environmental issues. Herzlichen Willkommen, Alexander. Robin Jowett is a partner at EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young. He's a leader in mergers and acquisitions in Central Europe, as well as CIS. Robin Jowett, he's over 30 years' experience in cross-borders M&A, mergers and acquisitions, in emerging economies, advising both international investors and local companies how to expand. Archie Gatchichili-Ladze is the chief executive of the Bank of Georgia. Archie, I'm apologizing for pronouncing your name so badly. He was appointed executive director and CEO in January this year. He serves as a member of the Risk Committee and is the CEO of the bank. Prior to his recent appointment, he served as CEO of Georgian Global Utilities since the beginning of 2017. He joined the bank in 2009 as deputy CEO of corporate banking and has since held various roles with the bank and the group, such as Deputy CEO Investment Management. He was the CFO of the BGEO Group and Deputy CEO of Corporate Investment Banking. Good morning to you all. I am going to start with David, and you may need your headphones because David would prefer to speak in Georgian. David, you're the head of one of the largest state-owned financial institutions. What are the principles of fund operation and what are its main advantages, which makes it attractive for investors to partner with the partnership fund? And you may need your headphones if you don't speak Georgian.
დიდი მადლობა მივესალმები ჩვენს ძვირფას სტუმრებს. მოხარული ვარ, რომ თბილისში ასეთი წარმომადგენლობითი ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი ფორუმი ტარდება და სანამ თქვენს კითხვას გავცემ პასუხს, აუცილებლად უნდა გავიმეორო ის ფრაზა, ის სიტყვები, რომელიც გუშინ გახსნის ცერემონიალზე მოვისმინეთ, რომ ჩვენ ვიმყოფებით ახალი და ძველი აბრეშუმის გზის ცენტრში. მე ძალიან ხშირად მქონია ანალოგიური ტიპის ფორუმებზე ურთიერთობა, მაგრამ აი ეს ფრაზა ისე კარგად დამამახსოვრდა. ისე კარგად ჩამჭა და მინდა პოპულარობა პოპულარიზაცია გავუკეთო. რომ ახალი და ძველი აბრეშუმის გზის ცენტრი საქართველოს არა მხოლოდ იმიტომ, რომ გეოგრაფიულად უჭირავს მას ასეთი ტერიტორია, არამედ იმიტომ, რომ ტოლერანტობით, მენტალიტეტით.
Mentality, and by its history, Georgia deserves to be the center. Thank you very much for all of you being here. As concerns the partner fund and its role in attracting the investments, so I would like to tell you that the partnership fund is 100% state financial institution, in the composition of which and the sister companies of which are strategically important state structures like the Georgian Railroad, Gas and Oil Corporation, Electricity Transmission, and so on. And the partnership fund goal is to create as much comfort as possible to Georgian and foreign investors to kick off business in Georgia and to further evolve off. So we are doing our best not to cover the zone where we have the activities of commercial banks, which may be funded from the commercial banks. We are not entering this realm, and we are trying to step in the projects where commercial banks refrain or abstain because they are dealing with a startup or relatively high risks. But if we have the state interest to develop this project in Georgia from regional angle, because we are going to great lengths to develop our regions equally in asymmetry, which we have to be balanced, or the realms which are not developed in Georgia, and the state considers that these spheres, by all means, deserves interest in evolving in these fields. We try to attract investors to put in capital. I would like also to tell you that the partnership fund is always a minoritarian shareholder in businesses, so we never enter businesses with more than 49%, and our partner, which is the project initiator, which is mostly the runner of the business, we enter into the business with equity capital up until 49%. In some cases, dealing with the Georgian companies, we show them as the bankable companies, and the interest towards commercial banks pops up towards them. But many foreign companies which may not have the equity capital problem, but for them the partnership of the state is interesting because many plurality of issues on which they look at skeptically. So from the beginning, certification, logistical, and so on. For them, it is more convenient to have the state by their side. We are creating on the maximum level this comfort, and most importantly, we provide full option to the partner that our buyout to be dependent on them. So at any time, from starting the business, when they have a desire to buy out our share in business, of course, we give in the share to them without any sanctions, without any fines if we withdraw from the business on early stage, which in often occasions is done earlier than the stated time. So, for example, I can get you many examples when we had the free 5-7 years a year option for buyout, but our partners understood firmly on their feet and started working. They had a desire to buy out, or the commercial banks, there was an interest to replace us, and we are doing this with pleasure, and we replace ourselves by the commercial bank conditions. So thus, we are putting these resources in other projects because our interest is to use as many resources as possible to develop new projects in Georgia. My time is almost up, and I would like to hit exactly zeros. Thank you very much. William
now from the OECD. William, you've been looking at Georgia and this region, and you've been doing an analysis of it. You haven't published it yet. Can you give us now kind of a world exclusive of what the OECD is going to say when it publishes its report in a couple of months' time? William.
Thank you very much. Happy to do that. This is the OECD's investment policy review of Georgia. I'll start out by saying there's a lot of good news in it for Georgia, much of which we've already heard. And good news, after a while, gets boring. So I'm just going to confirm the issues that we've seen on institutional quality improvements, doing business. In particular, on the OECD's FDI Restrictiveness Index, Georgia's a top 10 performer. In only one sphere, which I'll speak about in a moment, does it have above average restrictions as compared to the OECD countries. Everywhere else, it is well below, very open. We see the remaining restrictions such as are there are quite normal, even for OECD countries, even for very open economies. And we do see quite substantial inward stocks of FDI relative to GDP, particularly given the country's natural endowments. This isn't a petro economy with Chevtechs, pouring in lots of money. So there's a lot to say about the success, but I want to talk about the challenges instead for the rest of my time. First of all, we do see, as I look at it, it's pretty clear there's a need for a kind of structural shift in where the investment is going in terms of we see an awful lot going into transport and communications associated with addressing transport bottlenecks and so on, which is terrific, and in energy. But these are not particularly job-rich sectors. I think we would like to see more investment going into agriculture in particular, and the agri-food sector, which has tremendous potential, and which right now attracts a very small proportion of inward FDI. I'll talk about why in a moment. And in particular, manufacturing as well, which is only about 13% of the inward FDI stock as of the most recent figures I've seen. Now, one reason for the problem with agriculture is we have seen in one sphere some movement backwards. We've seen the restrictions on land ownership, agricultural land ownership in particular, by foreigners. That's actually relatively common across much of this region, but it is nonetheless a problem, and it is certainly perceived as such, particularly when you look at the productivity of the agricultural sector, at its potential given the country's natural endowments. This is a sector that needs consolidation, it needs productivity growth, it certainly needs investment. A further area where we do see some challenges, and this relates to the experience of Ireland, in fact, is when it comes to investment policy and strategy. Georgia's done very well attracting investment because it has focused on the basics of the business environment, which is terrific. That is where you should start. Great investment promotion is no substitute for a sound contracting environment. Nonetheless, we've seen a lot of initiatives, a lot of strategies, often rather fragmented. So there's been lots of activity, but lacking a kind of overall strategic framework, frequent institutional reforms that are quite disruptive to investment promotion efforts. And certainly I think of Ireland because we work with the Irish here in the region with experts who've experienced Ireland's transition, those who began with investment promotion in Ireland in the 70s. And they will tell you, you've got to respond, you've got to adapt as you go to what works and what doesn't. But a certain level of stability of institutions and strategic focus is essential because, as Declan Murphy has said repeatedly, the work they did paid off spectacularly for Ireland, but it didn't pay off quickly. Ireland was at it for a long time before things really began to turn. So we've got some suggestions there about how Enterprise Georgia could work more effectively in the current institutional context. And I think the final area of challenge that I see, I'll name two things which are a little bit outside of investment policy narrowly conceived. One is skills. We have the PISA results coming out next month. We also have a major OECD report coming out early next year from colleagues in the Education Directorate. There's much that can still be done here to strengthen the skills base so that human capital becomes an even more important attractor. And the last point, perhaps the one on which I would be the most negative, although I'm pleased to say the government is working on this right now, we find the competition policy framework here to be extremely problematic. The legislative framework is not the problem. The problem is that the competition authority, which is highly motivated and has a lot of very competent people, doesn't have the enforcement tools and teeth that it needs. There is legislation now under discussion, so it's an open question how far it will get, but certainly we would support the government in pushing for a substantial strengthening in the investigative and enforcement powers of the GCA. And I will stop there. Thank you.
That's really good. Thank you very much, William. I'm going to turn to the three other panelists and ask them the following question. Beyond international rankings and indices, which we talked about in the last session, what are the factors that you are considering when investing, and what can you say about Georgia? Let's start with Alexander.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here at the forum. My name is Alexander Meyer. I'm signed here as Chairman and CEO of AE Solar. Our company was established in Germany in 2003. The company has grown from a family-owned Bavarian solar panel system installer to an innovative global operating company with over 500 employees worldwide. Today, we are operating with offices in Europe, Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. Currently, we are opening US branch office. Globally, we operate a sales network with distributors over 72 countries. In Georgia, we have now around about 150 employees, and we think next year we have over 400 employees. In May this year, we commissioned our first Georgian factory located in Kutaisi. The factory manufacturing photovoltaic modules has a capacity of 500 megawatt annually, equal to around about 1.5 million solar panels. This is enough to provide over 100,000 households with a clean electric power. The decision for Georgia was taken after in-depth research and comparison with other locations in different countries of the region. We see a lot of advantages in Georgia. We are, for example, an open economy, fair labor law, ideal regulatory aspects, and low-cost utilities. The central geographic location, trade agreements into all major markets globally, and well-adjusted legislation in terms of investment, protection, and business-friendly tax regulators are main drivers. Finally, and most welcome for the investors, the environment is very well supported by the government and NGOs. Our main issues where we ask the government to focus on is to provide better support to investors who are already operating in Georgia. We have partial issues with infrastructure, like, for example, the power supply, which is neither enough to run the manufacturing in the full capacity, nor to expand. We are paying additional 4% tax and are discriminated against importing competitors which are not obligated to pay this tax. At the same time, there are cases of the dumping of prices. Now, the anti-dumping law is under development. Therefore, we hope that it will be developed and implemented soon. We have a development pipeline in Georgia with the intention to establish another manufacturing for localization of the products in the nearest future. AE Solar will increase our local staff, which is actually working in the global sales, application projects, research and development. For this beautiful country, with people dedicated to build a modern, democratic and economically developed society, the renewable energy sector can provide a great opportunity, economic growth and intention respective have a positive and sustainable impact, securing a clean world for our children. We highly recommend to all of our partners to take in account Georgia as a great potential location for their investment projects. We highly appreciate what we could achieve in 2 years after establishing a global sales office in Tbilisi and large-scale manufacturing site in Kutaisi. As Prime Minister said, our target is to boost the economic development of the region. Beyond that, attracting international investments for a sustainable development in Georgia is very important. Finally, I want to tell you that AE Solar is sponsoring this event because we are highly committed to be a part of Georgia's future development. We will do whatever is possible to expand operations here, create new jobs, economic growth, and contribute to the well-being of Georgian people. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all a very successful day.
Herzlichen Dank, Alexander. Thank you for your time. Now, I'm going to ask Abdul Rahman then to give his views. You're obviously coming from the perspective of Qatar.
Yes, Joe, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity. And I hope our perspective will shed some light as to the question you have asked and potentially other questions. Let me start by giving some context from the industry that we come from. Qatar Navigation, or Milaha, is a shipping and logistics company. We are the largest integrated supply chain company from the Middle East. That includes the shipping side, the ports, and the onshore distribution and logistics elements of the supply chain. And our reason for existence is to facilitate trade. And we see a lot of interest coming from Georgia. My first time to come to this beautiful country was about a year ago, and I'll talk a little bit about what we have done maybe later. Regarding your question on indices, I think it's a great start. I think as the previous panel, one of the members mentioned that from a high-level view, or for some of our board or shareholders in Doha, it really helps in bringing them up to speed to what we see or what I see here. But I think what has impressed me more, and is probably more important, is how these performance against these rankings were achieved and how they achieved these high rankings in those indices. And for me, there's a clear direction, a general direction towards reform, and that to achieve those indices and to attract investment and to attract business and trade. And I think those are quite comprehensive. I think the indices are the outcome of those initiatives. And so I was more impressed maybe with the approach and the direction that the country is going in. And we find that quite interesting. From our side, when I first came here about a year ago and to visit Georgia, we have already launched our first European endeavor and launched a container line between Greece, Turkey, Georgia, and Russia, and providing additional access points for exporters and importers into the country. And we look at other factors like any other business in terms of risk and in terms of the requirements for rule of law, looking at a stable fiscal and financial regime, including taxation. And we find a consistency here in Georgia. From a market and potential opportunities perspective, Georgia presents a lot of advantages. Beyond these indices, it's clearly on a potential trade routes and corridors, whether it's from the Middle East to Europe or from Asia to Europe and vice versa. It provides excellent connectivity. And our role, we see a lot of potential. And the potential comes from maybe not so all the positive things that have been mentioned earlier. I think there are some areas where there could be an improvement. In the previous panel's questions or the polls, cost effectiveness was equally important as diversification. And I say for us, that's precisely the kind of customers we're looking for. We provide the ability to transport goods from one place to another in a cost-efficient manner. There are some challenges. For example, the port charges that we have to pay, our shipping line has to pay in Georgia, are the highest in the Black Sea that we have to face elsewhere. And I think there's some room to improve there that could unlock potential opportunities. There are also other restrictions related to corridors, but companies like us look for those opportunities where there is potential to invest and to unlock these opportunities and for the benefit of our customers, which are effectively the business community. So I think beyond the indices, these are the things that we find quite interesting here in Georgia, and I'd like to run with 1 minute to spare.
Sure.
So that we can stay on time.
Abdurrahman, thank you very much for your time. Archil, same question.
Thank you very much. Before going to answering the question, I would like to give a little bit of an overview what Bank of Georgia is, and a story that very much reflects all the positives that have been discussed here. So the turnaround of this bank really started with Western management in 2003, when the capital of the bank was $20 million. From 2006, we were listed on London Stock Exchange. We went to the market there and attracted first $100 million into the country to grow the capital. And since then, we have not had a single year of loss making. So we have always been profitable, albeit a bit lower profitability in 2008 and 2009. So, but we have not needed any recapitalization or any strengthening of capital through the crisis. And now we are basically close to $1 billion market capitalization. And as this company started some 15 plus years ago of turning around a smallish bank at the time with the help of institutional investors, but those were regional funds like Firebird and East Capital. Today, there's no majority shareholder, no founding shareholder. We are all held by institutional funds, pension funds, the JP Morgans, the BlackRocks, and so forth, which puts us into a unique position in terms of a regional bank that is fully institutionally owned. So that leads me to basically underlying one thing which is very important in this region, which is corporate governance, and our commitment to it, because we believe corporate governance and high standards of corporate governance are like a religion to our organization. It has paid very well for us. Now, we led the way towards the public markets. We were the first company, but nowadays there are 4 companies that are listed on London Stock Exchange that are operating in Georgia. 2 of the largest banks are listed there, and 2 other companies, one Georgia Capital and one GHG, are also listed on London Stock Exchange, and in a way represent the easiest way for institutional investors to invest in Georgia. Currently, we employ about 7,500 people, and what's interesting is that, like for the rest of the world, banking is going 90+% digital. So currently, out of all the transactions that we do, about 93% are digital. And looking forward, what we see is that will probably be more like 97, 98 in a few years' time. Now, what does that mean is that we will still have branches, but usually people will go to branches to get an advice, to do larger decisions like mortgages, etc. But for everyday banking, basically, we do it through our mobile, which is the branch that we go to. And that's the reason why we have decided to double our IT resource. So we went from 300 people to 600 people in less than a year to speed up the changes that we want to do in the digital world. And that is something that we are able to do in Georgia. And initially, we thought that it would be hard to hire so many digital IT developers and user experience people, etc., locally. And we were thinking of either importing or outsourcing part of the work to some of the Eastern European countries. But the reality surprised us that we were able to fully staff it at a very cost-effective way. So one of the things that are not in indices are still access to qualified people, although as Irakli mentioned, and I like to complain about the shortage of it, because more would be better. So that I will stop here and spare half a minute to other participants of the panel. Thank you,
Archie. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Robin now. Robin from Ernst & Young, EY. How would you assess the investment climate here in Georgia, and which are the most attractive economic sectors? Which are the most attractive economic sectors?
So, thank you very much for the question and for asking me to attend this summit. It's a great initiative in terms of raising Georgia's profile. As you said, I'm working together with EY, and I think EY has 200 people working here in Tbilisi. We're working together with the investors that are bringing the FDI into the country, as well as the local companies that are developing within this environment. We have a young and dynamic office here that is very, very interested in being connected with the outside world and being connected with the investment streams. And I think this is a little bit a microcosm of what we're seeing in the business community at large here in Georgia. So it's a very good sign for the way in which people are looking at the world. In terms of the investment climate here, clearly there are some very, very good dynamics at work. I think we are at a very important part of a cycle where this part of the world is becoming much more strategic location. Many, many more people are talking about you know, the Belt and Road Initiative and the fact that this is becoming a very important part of the world in a change in the form of globalization that we've seen from the last 30 years. You know, I think people have talked about globalization being driven by the West, and probably the globalization dynamic is being increasingly driven from the East these days. And obviously that brings out new trade routes and more important areas. And it seems that Georgia is very, very well positioned to take advantage of this. So the macro factors are very, very good for Georgia. I think the other thing, as part of my role, I am looking at M&A transactions in 31 economies across Central Europe, Russia, and emerging Europe. All of them are competing for the same investment dollars as Georgia. I've been as far north as Estonia and heard people talking about, you know, the old Silk Road route. So this is a story that many countries are competing for the investment dollars. I think, therefore, that it's very important that it is seen as a consistent and long-term part of the project to bring the investment freedom and stability that the government is currently engaged on. We've heard a few areas, for example, the gentleman who's investing in hydro, talking about continually renewing policies. I think investors need to see a clear and consistent strategic path, that they can see the steps on the way and not seen as individual initiatives. So I think it's very, very important to see that entire framework. It's very, very difficult to fault any of the macro programs that the government is currently engaged on. It seems to be very, very clear it wants to be the liberal, open trade heart of an emerging region. And from that perspective, the investment climate looks good. Clearly, there are always greater structural reforms and developments that come with a developing economy. Financial services sectors, great that there are 2 listed banks, but there's going to need to be a significant investment of capital in this region. So we need to see continual development in that area to increase the development. And so I do see a very, very good investment climate. I think you had a pretty good representative sample on the board here of on the previous panel of the types of sectors that were going to be very important. Clearly, I believe my colleague on my right talked about the logistics sector being overweight, but you see that as really being a pioneer that will hopefully bring pull-through in other sectors as well. Hopefully, those companies will bring business services and IT development skills that are needed to support them and can lead to the development of the wider economy. So, very bullish about its position, very excited about the results to date and the potential developments, and hopefully the government can keep a consistent strategy to give the investors clarity of longer-term vision as well as short-term vision. Thank you.
Robin, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to, thank you. I'm going to go back to David and ask David a question. The scale of the project supported by the Partnership Fund also demonstrates the importance of the fund's role in attracting foreign investment. As the largest state and financial institution, what challenges do you face in this regard?
Thank you. Let me kick off by the fact that the fund is conducting investments in a diversified manner, and to our partners will give the opportunity to the maximum levels like energy, processing industry, tourism, agriculture. On the maximum level, we try to develop this in the country, but I would like to tell you that over the last period, we have restricted our directions. So we would like to withdraw as much as possible from energy field, from hospitality business, due to the simple reason that we somehow give a nudge, give a stimulus to development of this field, and they have absolutely healthy competition in the energy field, for example, where we have many local or foreign investors are desirous to fund these projects, our banks as well, and we are trying so not to have the overlap by the state and not to compete with the private sector. The same hospitality business, so in many regions where the tourism was not, this part of tourism was not well developed, we gave very good incentive and good example how the hotel development may trigger the general development of the regions. We helped many brand type of hotels enter the regions where they have not been before, and they would like this trend, this tendency, so to hand off to the private financial institutions and to stay on the following direction. Regarding the challenges, the most important directions for us is the enterprise is created on the basis of the modern technologies, innovative projects, and the projects that are mostly oriented at export and export potential to be enhanced as much as we can and to assist this industry. And in parallel with that, also the import replacing enterprises, which will give us the opportunity to diminish import and to put on the market the local products. So the challenge and one of the overarching difficulties, we have heard about high technologies and we spoke about the banks. And the challenge is that qualification of the individuals in Georgia is difficult to select the cadre, and we have the problems related to the personnel, but in terms of, I have a very good example with LBT. We set up the company ATS with manufacturing, so spare parts for Boeing, Airbus, for such giants, and there was the absence of professionals, but over a year we trained the personnel almost 100%, over 150 people. They are very successfully trained people, are successfully working in this enterprise. In this direction we do a lot and we'll be doing a lot. Thank you.
David, can I come back to something that Abdul Rahman said? You might need your headphones for this. He said that the port charges in Georgia were amongst the highest in the area. I know you are not with the Georgian government, but is there anything that the Partnership Fund can do to address Abdul Rahman's concern about the cost of using Georgian ports?
Thank you very much that you have mentioned that I am not with the government, and maybe this is not within my remit, within my competence, but the Partner Fund can raise this issue at the governmental session, provide statistics, examples from the analogous ports, analogous businesses. We can submit these examples of the government, and we can make this. We can activate this issue. Of course, the government is a decision maker in this regard, but our role will be that as well as the other businesses, to provide conducive environment to assist you and to protect the interests, which is called the protection of interests of investors to Georgia. Let us be also in conjunction, and we'll try to jump in this issue. Thank you.
But now I'm going to put that back to Abdul Rahman. Have you heard something that might encourage you? He's going to raise the issue of port charges with the government. And while you're answering that question, Abdul Rahman, can you think about any other things that the government could do to improve things for you, to make Georgia a hub for investment in the region?
I'd like to thank the offer for doing that. Rest assured, we have raised it with the relevant authorities ourselves directly.
I'd say you have.
It's quite one of those things that stand out, and I think that would require to be addressed to be able to go forward. But yes, I have heard encouraging signs, and let's say the the warm welcome we have received from our customers, from the relevant authorities, the ability to access the relevant authorities has been tremendous, and I think truly impressive. And we look forward to working together to overcome the challenges to be able to unlock the potential that we see and we're committed to. And I think the other area that we ought to talk about in terms of partnership and the partnership fund, for example, or other areas. Human capital was mentioned several times, and I think this is an area where we have done in other areas of business, trained people to be mariners and to facilitate the maritime industry. And I think the potential for not just attracting financial institutions or other types of institutions into the country by great regulation, I think there could be the potential to develop a strong flag state, and this is quite a shipping term, but basically the flag that the ship chooses to use could be there, and that could be a huge contributor to things like a lot of specialist advisory services in terms of inspection of vessels, etc. It could bring in insurance business as well, because our business is a very asset-heavy business. The ships are quite expensive, and they need to be insured, etc. That can be quite attractive for banks for financing. And establishing Georgia as a flag state could also be, with very advanced regulation, could be there. The training of Georgians, for example, in the maritime sector could also be something that we can help explore with them. But we would like to see also the progress regarding, as I mentioned, unlocking some of the efficiency. The government has other projects to enhance capacity in ports and bring in larger ports, which can help improve the cost, not necessarily directly through port charges by introducing competition, but also by allowing larger scale and bringing larger ships, which also reduces unit cost. So yes, we have heard a lot of good feedback, and I think there's no shortage of initiatives. But I go back and I say that our business is an asset-heavy business, and we look for consistent long-term stability, long-term stable growth, and long-term returns to be able to justify our investments.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Arkil from Bank of Georgia. When you are looking to lend money to somebody or invest in somebody, are you working with someone who is already thinking of investing in Georgia, or are you approaching someone with a blank page saying you should invest in Georgia and we will lend you the money?
Thank you. We just in terms of a couple words about how we lend overall. So we are a universal bank. We lend to individuals as well as very large corporates, large for Georgian standards. Many businesses have been created by the owners here and fully supported from day one by Bank of Georgia. In some cases, when there are investments of the size of $50 or $100 million, a lot of times IFIs are supporting them, but IFIs usually take longer time than we do. So we usually can do projects within 1 or 2 months when IFIs take 6 to 12 months. So a lot of large projects have been done with our help. David mentioned that in energy and hospitality, there are local banks that are very active, and I have to say that we were the first bank that financed that did a project finance of a branded hotel back in 2010. We were the first bank that did the project finance of a relatively small hydro plant, which was 10 megawatts at the time, also around those times. And now we are equipped to do much larger projects based on project finance as well as others. To come back to your question, I think we have been promoting Georgia as an investment destination given the fact that we are institutionally owned. So we talk to institutional investors a lot, first promoting Georgia, and then 90% of our conversation is about Georgia and only 10 is about our bank, because once you're sold on Georgia, it's a very easy decision. But mostly, we in terms of our clients, we are in discussions with people that decide to come to Georgia. Mostly that is the case. But I have to say that we are ready to support from day one and be there to basically during the creation from a brownfield onwards or greenfield onwards, developing the business and financing, and be there as a long-term partner for the investors investing in Georgia. Thank you.
Arkeel, thank you very much. Now, can I go back to William, please, from the OECD? You've already talked about some of the challenges in your first answer. What advice would you give to the Georgian government if they said, we want to make this country a hub for investment in the region? We want people to invest here and then use it as a base to invest in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, wherever it is. What advice would you give? And, you know, don't be afraid to repeat some of the things you may have hinted at in your first answer.
Sure, I'll certainly repeat some of them. Thank you very much for the question. I mean, the first thing I would certainly say is to continue to focus on the fundamentals. As I said, we think there's a lot that can be done about investment strategy and investment promotion, but it's a secondary issue. The primary issue is to continue to address the fundamentals of the business environment here, which is outstanding by regional standards. In some sectors, it's outstanding by any standard. But you have to keep pushing, and as I said, for me, my short list of 2 is what I gave at the end. There's a good deal that can be done, particularly in the field of education, to strengthen the skills base of the Georgian economy. And my colleagues in the Education Directorate particularly point to kind of large disparities in quality and access across the country. I mean, there's some outstanding achievements at the top of the spectrum, but that has to spread and be more inclusive. And likewise, I stress, you know, the need to strengthen the competition authority here. They're motivated, they're competent, but they do not have the power to compel information revelation, to impose financial fines or remedies. They don't have the power to conduct unannounced on-site inspections in cartel investigations. These are all essential tools for competition authorities the world over. At the same time, there are sectors that are outside of the competition law. There are sectors that are under the competition law but outside the competition authority. These are all issues that we see need to be addressed, and we're well aware there is legislation in the works. This is a pre-election period, which makes that really tough. So I wish the government every success in pushing that ahead, because I'm sure there will be businesses that would just as soon carry on living with what we have now. So those in terms of the fundamentals. For investment policy and strategy, we think that within Enterprise Georgia, which now has this function, much more can be done in terms of the resources and mandate of the investment promotion arm on its own, but also, given the merger that has taken place, a lot of work is still to be done to realize the potential synergies between investment promotion and other Enterprise Georgia activities. This is really important because a lot of our countries have also merged these agencies, export promotion, SME, investment promotion. But the synergies don't come automatically. These bureaucracies will continue to work in silos to their tasks unless somebody with strategic vision starts putting them together so that FDI attraction is linked to SME development and we start building support for FDI linkages to the small and medium enterprise sector or to export promotion. So there's much more that can be done there. The last point I want to make, because I think we are here at the Silk Road Forum and we want to see Georgia in a regional context. For Georgia to realize its potential as a business hub in the region, it actually needs its neighbors and peers in the region to keep reforming as well. The reform progress of your neighbors is of first order interest. You may always want to be a little bit ahead of them. There's a competitive advantage in that, but you don't want to be pulling too far ahead of them, because the fact of the matter is you are not going to find a really prosperous Georgia sitting here in the midst of an otherwise poor region. There is a regional level of cooperation on policy reform that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good point, actually. And the OECD Eurasian Week next year, that's going to be important for what you're discussing. It's no good to be an island of prosperity if you're surrounded by poverty. Now I'm going to move on to Robin from Ernst & Young. How do you see the government of Georgia's role as facilitator of investments? How can the Georgian government facilitate companies coming in from abroad better than they already are? And again, there's a little bit of repetition here, but you know what I mean.
So I think it's a little bit adding on to the question that you asked about, you know, who was lending money and were they people that already knew about Georgia or not. So I think, you know, investment decisions are eventually not made purely on the basis of some macroeconomic policy. There have to be individual investors that have a business need to invest in Georgia and to take advantage of an opportunity or to solve some kind of operating issue that they have. And I think we heard the gentleman who you promoted to the global head of Cerberus earlier.
He got a big promotion. Yeah, Alexander.
Alexander, yeah. You know, he said that obviously when you look at Georgia from the US, one remembers certain aspects of its history rather than its current position. So therefore there is a need to identify a lot more the specific people who are going to take advantage of Georgia and its strategic location and its liberal environment, and to be able to firstly raise that profile so more people see it, but also to maybe have some industry program, trade programs that target individual areas. I think that's one area where we as EY, operating as a private organization targeting investors, we're constantly thinking in any country, who are the most likely people to be investing in this country, and why are they going to do it, and how can we target them? And I think at the micro level, that's where organizations like ours can really help, is in terms of helping with the outreach program to individual investors, because it is the individual investors that make those decisions.
Now, of course, EY is not a charity. It is in business to stay in business. When you're looking at the region, Robin, and you're looking at mergers and acquisitions, do you approach investors and say, you should invest in this country or that country, or do they come to you? This is a similar question than I asked to Arkeel. Do they come to you and said, I am thinking of investing in an emerging market or a frontier economy? Which happens first, do you think?
So generally, we are looking for interesting companies or sectors within the countries in which we are discussing. And then we are looking for those companies that require the investment to take them to the next level. So it is very, very much driven from the individual company and country level. I think if you go to investors and say which country, they'll look at you, you know, with glazed eyes, like a lion looks at a bunch of zebras and says, well, I know I want to eat something, but I don't know what it is. So,
but the lion will look for the weakest zebra in the back of the pack.
Well, maybe it's the wrong analogy.
Yeah.
So, you know, in that regard, it comes from individual companies making contact with individual investors, and that is eventually what makes the wheels go round and which helps to bring the investment to the country.
Brilliant. Can I come back to David and ask David a question? And you may need your headphones for his answer. You have invested in many companies. You've taken equity stakes up to 49%. Have you made a profit for the government of Georgia and the people of Georgia?
So I will kick off with the fact that all our projects are winning, so like profit making. We don't enter the projects which might be loss making. We have the partner which is majoritarian shareholder, and his interest is the profit. So, but we are not aimed at the fact that we have the maximum proceeds in difference with the commercial bank, and we quite well analyze that in some projects the risks might be high, but proceeding from the fact that for the state this is very important, and this must be the must for the development of the branch of the region. We also enter the high risk projects. So hitherto all these projects have proven to be successful, more or less profit making. We have the projects which have long term. So in terms of the our placement of money and withdraw on late basis, from these projects, but we usually very quickly leave the projects. So also the direction is very interesting, which is called Startup Georgia. So we are funding innovative ideas and the projects, and we give them quite advantageous conditions, but lower amount of money up until 100,000 liras, and we funded 120 projects, which gives the young student innovators to enter with the interesting projects, and they don't have to use collateral or undertake some financial commitments. So together with us, we deliberate on the project, and out of 120 projects, so we have 4 projects which gave some negative results, but we managed to get the money back. So, but the projects, some projects were very successful, and 7 projects were presented to Silicon Valley. So I will fall back on Ernst & Young representative mentioned on the Cerberus, so what Cerberus has mentioned. And I would like to tell you that what he has mentioned, and in yesterday's panel we heard oftentimes that owing to several ratings, so due to investment conditions, due to the taxation regime, is interesting country. Georgia is an interesting country. For us, it's a huge success, and I'll tell you why. So many of you have visited Georgia first time. Others visited over the last years, but I am the person who was born and raised here, and I remember 10, 15, 20 years ago when we used to speak with investors, so we were telling them that we have very good geographic locations, so that we are the like the sea state, that we are the easternmost location for Asia, proceeding from our location. So, and right now, speaking about this is a bit embarrassing because we are away from the stage where we were boasting only with our geographic conditions, and right now we are speaking what kind of ratings, what kind of indexes, what kind of successes, and what kind of concrete examples of investment Georgia can speak about. So, and this happened in the nearest past, over 10, 15 years, which gives us a lot of optimism and a lot of chances to use this success as much as we can together with you, of course.
Thank you very much, David. Before we go to the poll results, I'm going to ask for very quick answers to the following question. And I'm less than a minute, please, and we'll start with Robin at the back. Where do you think Georgia will be in economic terms in 10 years? Crystal ball. I'm going to need your microphone.
I think the current growth rates are going to take it, forward very quickly. So I see good development. I couldn't tell you exact numbers, but clearly it is in a good position to take advantage of some of the major dynamics that are going on around it, and the government is doing a great job in, continuing to take that forward.
Brilliant. William.
Tied up in its OECD and EU accession tracks?
Yes.
OECD first, of course.
That was less than 30 seconds. Do you want to say something, Alexander?
I think if the government will invest in the education, what is very important, I think this is one of the important points, because educated people are going to be healthy, and also protect the environment. So I think the growth of 5 to 6% is the minimum for this country.
For 10 years, that's very okay. Arkil, where do you think Georgia will be in economic terms in 10 years?
So Georgia is growing around 5%. Inflation target is around 3%, so nominal growth is roughly 8%. So in about 10 years' time is about 2.4, 2.5 times. This is if we go on as we are. But there's a potential for this country to grow at 7 or 8% with roughly the same inflation, which would mean that we would double every 5 years, which would mean quadruple in 10. So it will be somewhere between 2.5 to 4 times the GDP. And I have to say that I'm not omitting the fact that over 10 years there could be a crisis. But 5% growth that this country has delivered historically over the last 15 years, more or less, did include a lot of hard times of 2008, one of the largest shocks this country has had. So 2.5 to 4 times the GDP in 10 years' time, depending if we accelerate or not.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Arkil.
you.
Abdul Rahman, 10 years.
I think in a period of challenging globalization progress, I say Georgia seems to be a bastion of progress in that direction in terms of opening up markets and facilitating trade, and I think that's only going to help in its advantage going forward. I think at the second level, let's say more on the economic side, 2 things that I need to mention. One is nominal growth is more important for our business than real growth from a volumes perspective. And again, consistent and steady. Obviously, inflation will have an issue in terms of financial return, but in terms of volumes, nominal is quite important. The other thing economically is important is that currently the economy has a balance of trade deficit, so it imports more than it exports. And I think from a logistics and shipping perspective, that's extremely important for us to balance the inward cargo with the outward cargo to get the maximum efficiency. A lot of initiatives mentioned earlier by the panels, and particularly the fund where there's a shift in focus towards export-oriented business. I hope that materializes. And having said everything before that, in 10 years' time, I expect that Milaha will have or Qatar Navigation will have a larger involvement in Georgia.
Thank you, Abdul. David, you have the last word. In 10 years' time.
So I will not tell you anything new. I will reiterate what you have said in the morning. 20, 30 years ago, Ireland, so where from you, it's your country of provenance. It was the poor country based on agrarian field, but the correct policy created such status that Ireland is the second rich state in Europe, is a bit behind Luxembourg. So it was a very good example. I think that 10 years ago, I'm an optimistic person, but realist. Georgia maybe was behind Ireland, but we have our potential in the region to be the front runner and to come closer to you, and we will a bit closer to you. We'll be managing to do this. And regarding economy, what will happen in 10 years? I'm assured that after 10 years, so in the World Cup rugby, so Georgia and Ireland will be playing in quarterfinals, and I am hopeful of that.
I think we're all agreed on that, unless there's anyone from England here. I'm going to ask for the poll results to be brought up, please. If we could get the poll results to see how you all voted on your Slidos. There we go. Well, can we get on the screens here in front of us, please, as well? There we go. All right. The question, which is obscure, what are the advantages of investing in Georgia? 44% being regional business hub, 32% voted for a network of free trade agreements, 18% for low taxes, and 6% only for competitive labor costs, spelt the American way. Okay, very briefly, much less than a minute, again at the back, Robin, are you surprised at the result, and what would you have voted for?
Not surprised at all. I mean, it's clearly, being the location in this region, taking advantage of the strategic location. So not surprised at all by that result.
Okay. Next up, William, what do you think?
Much the same view. I mean, it struck me, and I did vote. I whipped out my phone before we got going for a regional business hub, largely because the other three, in some ways, are contributing components of the first one, of being a regional business hub. That's the first point. They really are elements of that. And the second point, I think, is we have to be realistic. This is a small country. This is a small market. If you're being attracted to invest here, chances are, if the investment is on any scale, it's not primarily for this local market. And that's why Georgia's openness is such an important part of its strategy and such a successful part of its strategy, that you come here to tap quite a lot of other markets, and frankly, not only across the region, but I think increasingly across the world.
Alexander, do you want to say something on that?
From our investment perspective, it was a little bit different because for us was the low tax issue and competitive labor costs and network free trade agreements. That was important for us. local region business is not there for solar industry. It will develop now, and we have already many discussions with the companies what are developing projects here locally, solar PV plants, and I think this aspect will for us grow also in the next years.
Thank you, Alexander. Arkil, what would you have voted for?
The first two are basically the same. I mean, how can you be a regional hub without a network of free trade agreements? And then probably low taxes as well. Just one thing I will underline one more time is that we don't have any natural resources to live off. So we really have, and it's a small country, so there's no internal market by itself is less attractive for a lot of investors. So I think the only right choice is the development strategy that we have to really form it into a regional hub, which includes, I will agree, these components.
Abdul Rahman, what would you have voted for?
Pretty much in line with what they've mentioned. I think regional hub would have been my answer, and I think the rest are pretty much components. But I would have ranked lower taxes. Probably lower. I would have ranked lower taxes
a bit higher up
to be higher up from our side.
David.
Of course, regional hub is the most important question, and we have to put in a lot, but I cannot agree today. So with the perception that Georgia is a very small market, yes, of course. So the country with 3.7 million is a small market. If we don't bear, never take liking to, and never say that, never utter this thing to pay little to the labor force. So the time of this has already passed, and we have some other challenges and stages.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before you all head for your lunch, let me just thank our panel who have been excellent today. David Zaganalidze from the Partnership Fund, William Thompson from the OECD, Alexander Maya from AI Solar, Abdul Rahman Essa Almani from Milaha, Robin Jowett from Ernst & Young, EY, and Arkil I'm going to struggle with this, Gachililadze. I'm sorry, excuse me. Thank you all. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Thank you.
Dear forum participants, we would like to thank you for attending the forum and remind you that the lunch for the forum participants is served at the Museum of Modern Art.